The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Construction is underway for the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nations' $26 million greenhouse complex. The greenhouse is 412,000 square feet and will be located near Parshall, North Dakota. The massive building will use flared natural gas for heat and to provide carbon dioxide, which plants need to grow. The project plans to unfold in 3 phases, and the nation hopes this will be the first of several sprawling greenhouses. According to the Bemidji Pioneer, the produce growing initiative will occupy an area equal to 7 football fields. MHA Chairman Mark Fox says the project will reduce environmental waste in the form of flared gas and create a stable food system for the tribe. Groundwork has already begun and is slated for completion in September of next year. Indigenous communities in Cusco, Peru, are celebrating the return of an Andean relic. The return of the item came during a celebration of the ancient sun god for the winter solstice. This event was canceled last year due to pandemic restrictions in the country. As part of the celebration, actors marched into the ruins of the Sacsayhuaman fortress while dancers played drums. The ceremony also included Peru's President Francisco Sagasti passing the golden disc to the mayor of Cusco. The relic had been in possession of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. It was returned to Peru in June. The president spoke about the day and what this place means to him.
Es un momento de especial alegría y orgullo para mí estar con ustedes en la fiesta del Inti.
This is a special moment of joy and pride to me, to be in the Inti Raymi celebration, the sun festivity in Sacsayhuaman, this space that surrounds us in the bicentennial independence year symbolizes the greatness of the Inca Empire.
The celebration is usually a landmark event in Cusco with thousands of people attending. However, this year's ceremony was closed to the public. A new novel looks at the relationship between women and seeds. The story is told through generations of Dakota women. And as Shirley Snavy reports, the story also includes the confrontations of modern-day activism.
The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson shows how generations of women carry on their Dakota culture through the seeds they plant. It's Wilson's 3rd book, but her first novel, all going back to 1862 and the events surrounding the Minnesota Uprising.
To tell the story of food and to tell, I had to go back. I had to go there again and tell that story about the women who protected their seeds, because there's that traditional way of gardening, there's that traditional diet, there's all of our beautiful food traditions before that, and to me it's so important to know this is our culture.
Fast forward, Rosalie is a farmer, Gabby is an activist who protests against genetically modified seeds.
I wanted to show different ways of doing work. So you can be an activist, you can be a gardener, you can find different ways, but they're all going to have challenges. It's going to be hard work, whatever road you take.
Wilson's latest work is a young reader book about Ella Deloria.
What she did to preserve language and culture growing up in what had to be one of the most difficult times of history for Dakota and Lakota people, as she was born right after Wounded Knee, and assimilation was, happening so fast, and yet she had that She had that vision.
In Schaefer, Minnesota, Shirley Snavy, Indian Country Today.
The Walker Art Center in Minnesota is announcing a Dakota-created addition to its Minneapolis Sculpture Garden. Angela Two-Star titled her piece, Okchi-Yapi, which means help each other in Dakota. The public art space will provide a site for visitors to engage with the Dakota language. The sculpture in the garden will have ringed seating made from custom cast concrete and makes reference to a rippling drop of water.
The concept was thinking about the way a drop of water can ripple across an entire pond. I thought about my grandfather's legacy, you know, and work in language revitalization and how that knowledge, after he passed, can ripple across generations of speakers. And so that became the concept, like the visual of what that sculpture would be like a ripple effect from a water drop.
It will be unveiled in the Walker's Sculpture Garden this October. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, an urban restoration project brings Dakota people and sacred sites to the table. Maggie Lorenz tells us about the Lower Phalen Creek Project.
Plus, a preview of some of the star Native athletes competing at this year's Native American Basketball Invitational. Stay tuned. The Twin Cities of Minnesota are on Dakota land. The confluence of waterways there has made a perfect hub for commerce and ceremony. In 1766, an English explorer stumbled upon an important Dakota sacred site. He named it Carver's Cave. Its original name, Wakantipi, has been reclaimed, and it's part of a larger inner-city effort to clean up toxic waste and restore land. Maggie Lorenz, Executive Director of the Lower Phalen Creek Project, leads those efforts. Welcome, Maggie.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on today.
This is a huge restoration. Maybe start by telling us about the project.
Sure. So Lower Phalen Creek Project is an East Side St. Paul environmental nonprofit organization, and we are Native-led. We've been doing this work on the East Side for more than 20 years. Largely driven by the community here in St. Paul, and more recently driven by Dakota people in particular. And so the work that we're doing is in a lot of the parks and green spaces on the east side of St. Paul, but those parks and green spaces contain a lot of cultural resources and culturally significant sites that we want to try to bring more awareness to and help the community have a better understanding of how to interact with those spaces and have some respect for those sacred sites.
Native people were very urban 2 centuries ago, and cities like Minneapolis have a story to tell because of that urbanness that we sometimes forget about.
Yeah, absolutely. So where the site where we're working at, Wakantipi, is adjacent to, literally part of the Kaboja village, which is a Metawakan Dakota community that has been here for time immemorial, and many other Dakota communities along the Wakapatanka or Mississippi River joined at this place and came to this place as a hub. So it was really a hub or a city, if you know, as we call them now, but a big hub for commerce, trade and exchange of ideas and forming alliances, just like happens now in an urban area.
I understand there's a lot of events that include the public. Maybe tell us about those.
Sure, yeah. So we do a lot of community-led restoration work at both the sanctuary where Wakantipi is and the burial mounds at Indian Mounds Regional Park, as well as the other green spaces on the east side of St. Paul. And we invite community members in to help us with those restoration efforts. So we have a program that we work with the city of St. Paul called Restore, where we take out invasive species, we plant native species, and then we take, in the fall, we'll harvest those seeds that will then get propagated to create the next generation of those plants for those spaces in the future.
Well, what are some of the native species?
Yeah, so we have down at Wakantipi in particular in the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary. When I first started here, there's 4 medicines that we consider sacred, especially for Dakota people: sweetgrass, sage, cedar, and the red willow that we use for tobacco, chanshasha. And so at that time, when I first started, the only one of those 4 was growing in the sanctuary, and that was chanshasha. So since that time, we've been trying to reintroduce more plants that are both native and culturally important. So we've reestablished and introduced sage to the sanctuary. We've also added choke cherries and are planning how we can areas where we can add sweetgrass and cedar that will be a place that those plants will like to grow. That's really exciting. What are some of the plants that have to go? Buckthorn. So we have a huge problem with buckthorn here in the Twin Cities, like in a lot of other areas throughout the Midwest and the country. But buckthorn is a big problem that we're trying to tackle. We're also trying to tackle some other invasive species like thistle that, and a lot of these plants that are invasive, we're starting to talk about them just as displaced plant species because they do have their own gifts. This weekend, I like many people, drove across the West, and I was just struck by how many Russian olive trees have taken over anything with water. And that's a great example of that. One of the other things going on in Minnesota that's exciting is reclaiming native indigenous names. Maybe talk about that a minute. So one of the efforts that is, I think, most well known here in the Twin Cities was the renaming or reclaiming of the name Bede-Makaska for what was formerly Lake Calhoun. And that lake is located in Minneapolis and in a fairly wealthy part of the city. And it was a struggle. It was unfortunate. There were a lot of people were against that name change, but I think obviously we had an overwhelming majority of people who were in support of reclaiming the indigenous name of that particular place. And since that's happened, I've been involved in a number of other projects, in bigger or smaller roles, but for renamings of some of the schools here. Henry Sibley High School was just renamed to Two Rivers High School. And there's a park in a suburb of St. Paul called Pocahontas Park that is going through a name change process. So we're helping with the city of Roseville to get that park name changed. And in addition, there are a number of parks here in the city of St. Paul that are being just now established with new developments. And rather than, making some of the same mistakes that have been made in the past, we've been working really closely with the city so that there can be some recognition of the Dakota homelands and Dakota names given to these new parks as they become established. So it's been a really exciting time to be in the cities here. Names, of course, are incredibly powerful. How do people view the opportunity to see this as education, to learn about the community in ways they might not have thought about? Yeah, that's one thing that I really enjoy the work that I do, because there are so many people that have come to me with stories about, that they've lived on the east side of St. Paul for their whole life, or they've engaged with these green spaces and parks, but they never understood the history. And they certainly never understood that these places were significant, important places, and that they had names, and they have names, and that Dakota people still leave offerings and pray and do important things at those sites. And so I think there's a huge desire by the general population for this kind of education, and that's kind of the gap or the need that we're filling. One of those histories, and you mentioned it earlier, but let me just ask a bit more, is about trade routes with hubs. And so many of them parallel the trade routes today. It's like this has been going on for a long, long time. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of our major highways, a lot of our major roads throughout the Twin Cities were trails. And Of course, the Mississippi River is now a huge barge economy and still used as a trade route, and has been for millennia here by Dakota people and other neighboring communities and tribes and nations.
I want to ask you about one project, the Boys Town land.
Yeah, so Boys Totem Town is a really exciting project or perspective here on the east side of St. Paul. So this is about 80 acres, give or take, of land that overlooks the Mississippi River, is in, very well within the boundaries of historic Kaposia Village, and is known to have cultural resources and artifacts that have been discovered on this property. For over 100 years, this property has been used as a boys' juvenile detention facility, which was recently closed in 2019. And so this is owned by the county, Ramsey County Corrections. And so the county now has to go through a community engagement process and really understand how the community wants to engage with this space moving forward. But what's the most exciting, I think, for us at Lower Phalen Creek Project is the idea that there is a overwhelming majority of this 80 acres that has never been developed. So there's never been a plow in the ground. And that's really hard to find here in an urban area like the Twin Cities. And so there's old growth oak savanna. There's one oak that's been dated back to, you mentioned Jonathan Carver in your opening, 1766. And that oak tree was there when Jonathan Carver was here in 1766. So that's just really incredible land and history, and just how we can reconnect with that land as Native people, and then the general population, how that land can teach about our Indigenous lifeways and history. I think is really, the prospect is just incredible to me.
What an incredible opportunity. Last question I want to ask you about, with parks and stories like this, you have an opportunity to reach young people. Kids from schools and others are going to be coming to these places. What's the main takeaway for them?
Yeah, we love working with school groups and youth, and that's incredibly rewarding when we're able to bring young Native students, especially down to the sites. And recently we did a program where we brought a number of Native high school students down to the sanctuary who were able to help restore and plant some of those Native species I talked about earlier. They planted chokecherries and juneberries and sage. And, it's a powerful moment for them, because not only are they able to reconnect and learn more about their own culture and their history and who they are as Native people, but at a sacred site that's in their own community, because a lot of times I think growing up in the urban area, you think you have to go way out west, to find these sacred places where you can pray, but we have these places here too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was Maggie Lorenz from St. Paul, Minnesota. When we come back, we'll talk sports. The 18th Annual Native American Basketball Invitational and Youth Summit sees representatives from over 150 tribal nations who play 436 games of basketball. To give us a rundown on players to watch at this year's tournament, we have invited back our regular contributor to the show, Brent Cahwee. Brent is the co-founder of the very popular website indiansports.com, which covers Native athletes from high school to pro sports. Welcome back, Brent.
Hi, Mark. Glad to be back on the show again.
So this year you're going to be an on-air commentator for NABI TV. Tell us about the tournament and your role.
Yes, this year they're looking to broadcast the championship games for the girls and boys division. And, we were asked, me and one of my staff members were asked to commentate and co-commentate the game. So we're excited about the opportunity. We're excited about this kind of being the first time ever NABI's been streamed live. So we're just, really excited to get back to Phoenix and get NABI. The last time I was at NABI was in 2018 when I received the Phil Homoratha Leadership Award. So it'll be good to watch all the great Native American talent athletes out there. There's just so many kids that come from all over that represent so many tribal nations, and there's just so many talented athletes out there. There's so many to talk about, and I've brought a few names that I think people should catch a game or two if they have the opportunity as well. One individual I've been really excited about and got to watch play a few times now. His name is Jesse White. He's out of White Shield, North Dakota. He's from the Arikara Nation. And he was named, Mr. Basketball North Dakota this year, his senior year. And he'll be starting his career off at a junior college with the hopes of transferring to a Division I program. So he's definitely someone I think that people should watch and try to catch a game or two. Also, he's just a great ambassador for the game. He's a great ambassador for his people and his family. Just a real extraordinary young man. I always enjoyed speaking with him.
So you mentioned the sheer number of athletes and 436 games. How do you narrow that down to figure out which ones to follow?
Well, you don't do it at NABI. I've been fortunate this year to travel to a handful of Native American high school tournaments in Oklahoma, Arizona, Kansas, to name a few spots. And you really kind of have to pound the pavement and sit in the bleachers, watch games, cover games. For me, it's a 12-hour day. To sit in those gyms and cover kids and analyze kids and stuff like that. So you really kind of have to also get your ear to the ground and talk to some of the coaches and some of the kids there. And they'll always share the information with you. So I'm always looking for the next, the big Native American star that's going to be playing, other sports besides basketball. But it really takes a lot of work to get to this point and understand which athletes you need to follow and stuff like that. So I'm just excited about providing those names for you today as well.
So tell us about the logistics for a tournament this big, and even in a city like Phoenix.
Oh yeah, I mean, I believe they got 7 to 8 high school gyms that they're going to use for different locations. And so, with that many teams and that many games they're going to have with, I think it's 3 or 4 pool play games. So the logistics that go into it are just pretty crazy, and I don't know how they do it most of the time, honestly. But for them to have the 7 or 8 gyms that they're going to be using, you realistically, if you're going to go and map out a few games, you're probably only going to be able to make 2 or 3 just because of the distance required to get from one gym or back to the next gym and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of work, and my hat always goes off to the wonderful staff at NABI. They do a good job every year. Like you said, it's the 18th year. In Indian country, you don't get to say 18th year in anything unless you're doing something right. And NABI's always been able to do things right.
Well, this week in Phoenix, there's a lot of basketball fever anyway. There's another team doing pretty well.
Yes, definitely. That's in the process of, typically NABI has their championship games at the Suns Arena. And now that the NBA finals are going to be in that area, they're looking to possibly change the venue of the championship games for NABI. Hopefully we'll have a better idea of what that's going to look like. Obviously if the Suns sweep, then we may have access to NABI, but if it could be a 7-game series, then we'll probably have to move our championship games to a different location, which hasn't been announced yet either.
Well, for Indian country's sake, I hope there's a 4-game sweep. No other reason.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming and being part of the atmosphere out in Phoenix with being an NBA World Finals time for the Suns.
We're also coming up on the Olympics.
One athlete that I know for sure is going to the Olympics is Jillian Ward. She's from the Mohawk Territory in Canada. She qualified as the hammer throw participant for Team Canada. So she'll be representing at the Tokyo Olympics for Indian country.
And then a U.S. Olympic hopeful just missed by one, really a very small margin.
Yes, and then we had Janae Katsanetovoid. She's Comanche. She finished in 4th place at the U.S. Olympic trials. She was so close. I think it might have been just a 4 or 5 inch difference between, being in 3rd and 4th place. But she's going to continue to compete internationally now. I think she's actually in London this week right now, getting ready for a competition this weekend. She's planning to make this a full-time career as an international athlete now.
We only have a few seconds left, but I want to just close by, back in Tokyo for the Olympics means Billy Mills. Correct, yes. 1964, the Olympics were held in Tokyo, and Billy Mills was the 10,000 meter Olympic champion. No other American has won that event in the Olympics for the United States. So it's an honor he still holds, and I do believe he is making plans to attend the 64 Olympics as well. So it'll be a great experience for him and for all of us to see him go back to where it all happened for him. Thank you for being here, Brent. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Join us again tomorrow and online at IndianCountryToday.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.